Did you see what's happening down in Florida? Oh boy. So I'm like, Russia did what? Russia did what? And the U.S. is doing what? There's a nice little map for you. You know, I've said all along, ladies and gentlemen, you need to take Latin America seriously. You need to take the Western Hemisphere seriously. And the reason you need to do this is because, you know what? They can very easily infiltrate this area. In fact, I would argue that they already have. According to my sources in Venezuela, like the most common language other than Spanish in Venezuela right now is Russian. Everyone's Russian. I mean, you get some Iranians too. But you've actually got a ton of Russians. So if you look at this little map here, what you see is that 4 Russian vessels, including hypersonic missile carriers and nuclear submarines, passed 25 miles off the coast of Florida. What is this, like a Cuban Missile Crisis all over again? Now, I'm not going to overdo it. I'm told that they didn't actually have weaponry on board, but is this not a message or what? And this is clearly a message by Russia to Biden to say, hey, knock it off. Because just the other day we learned that our weapons, which, by the way, Biden's very proud. We just gave them more money. He announced it to Zelensky the other day, $275 million more. It's not a gazillion dollars, but, you know, it's something. And our weapons apparently are now being sent further into Russia by Ukraine. And so this is a little bit of a tit for tat situation, I think, where the Russians are like, hey, you know, how does it feel? How do you like this? And it's the reason why I've always said, we are mistaken not to actually lock up this Western Hemisphere, if you would, like Monroe Doctrine stuff, okay? Because why are we letting the Russians down there? Whether it be in Cuba or Venezuela or Bolivia or, you know, good for Malay and Argentina. You get a dose of common sense and conservatism happening there. But look at what's going on in Mexico right now. She's, you know, theoretically on our side, not on Russia's, of course, but she's still a super lefty. I mean, you've got a lot of problems with the entire hemisphere as a result of what's happening in Latin America. And if you actually wanted to address the root causes of immigration, Kamala Harris, I'm looking at you, then you would actually have serious substantive conversations about law and order in all of these communities down there. And instead, what do? You bring the chaos here. So now we have no law and order here. I mean, look, we'll see how this all unfolds. Again, let me go to Jake Sullivan, who made some comments just a short time ago. This is a National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, talking about the issue.
So just to take a step back, we have seen these Russian naval deployments sailing into Cuba in the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration. It's something we watch closely and carefully. It's something that we went out publicly on several days before it happened, so the world would understand the context and the world would also know that we are watching. And so we will see how this unfolds in the coming days. But we have seen this kind of thing before, and we expect to see this kind of thing again, and I'm not going to read into any particular motives by Russia.
So in other words, he's like, don't worry, this happens all the time. Hey, nothing to see here, just move on. You know, look, I'm not saying it doesn't happen all the time. I'm not saying it hasn't happened in other administrations. I just think it's curious, the timing of this happening in this particular time right now, right? Why is it happening right now? I think it's a direct response, actually, to the aggression that we're seeing out of Ukraine, where missiles are going in. I want to thank Juan Morales for his support. We get a lot of team members on here, which is great. Juan, you're going to have to join the team as well, but sending a little bit of support our way. So thank you for that. We always appreciate that, of course. You know, I see some regular faces here. Read Omega 24. It's good to see you back, Mike. Of course, good to see you too. I know we're looking at, and look, I'm not saying, by the way, that we shouldn't stick up for Ukraine here, right? Let me be clear. Like, this is extremely nuanced. My frustration with what's happened is that for some reason, nobody is actually willing to use real diplomacy to get anything done. I mean, where's Anthony Blinken when you need him, right? Like, what are he like sent Macron or had Macron go in to meet with Putin ahead of this and try and prevent him from actually getting into a full-blown escalation. But at the same time, let me just be a little bit of a realist here and say, if you look at how we increasingly encroached on Russia as well, it's like, hey, if they keep hanging out off the coast of Florida, we're going to start to get a little bit annoyed and a little bit nervous, and we might start doing some stuff, right? This is what happens because you were supposed to have Ukraine be this area that would have been more neutral. And instead, we kept moving and moving and moving, and we kept expanding. We kept expanding NATO. And when you go back and you look at the original architect of all of this, and you look at the Cold War ambassador to Russia, for example, during that time, George Kennan, what he would actually say is that it was a mistake to keep expanding NATO. That was actually the problem because the Russians immediately felt threatened, and nobody was willing to listen to his advice. Nobody's willing to listen, again, to any kind of common sense. And I don't fully understand what was in it for us entirely to just keep expanding. I mean, I get like the EU, like maybe they think the bigger the better, but even that's not perfect, right? Look what's going on in Europe right now. I mean, for goodness sakes, Macron, he's now calling elections. He's trying to call their bluff. But maybe they'll call his. He's already said, I'm not stepping down. I'm not stepping down. If they want Marie Le Pen, I'm not going anywhere. Well, then why the heck are you calling elections? Gosh, if you were in this country, we might say that you were doing something you shouldn't. But you think about Macron. You think about Justin Trudeau. We played this clip yesterday. He thinks they're going into civil war, for goodness sakes, there. And you think about everybody that has got some kind of axe to grind against the right. When the right is saying, look, we went left and look at where it put us, right? Look at where it put us. Not in a very, very good place. Drew's signaling to me he's got a good quote. This is actually one of George Kennan's quotes. Thank you, Drew. I've actually quoted Kennan a lot. And somehow, Drew, you just happen to have that handy. So, I got a good team. I kid you not. This is Kennan saying, and I quote, "I think it is the beginning of a new Cold War. I think the Russians will gradually react quite adversely and it will affect their policies. I think it is a tragic mistake. It shows so little understanding of Russian history and Soviet history. Of course, there is going to be a bad reaction from Russia." This was Kennan talking about what we were seeing earlier on. This would have been just as you were getting some of this expansion from NATO. In other words, he recognized that this would be, it's like we had the Cold War, it ended. And so what did everybody do? Well, I don't think they could function. I mean, they didn't know what to do with themselves. They're sitting around twiddling their thumbs over at the CIA. They're like, hey, what do? We don't have a Cold War anymore. Gosh, we're not going to get the same kind of investment in our personnel. We're not going to get the same kind of investment in companies that depend on this, right? The Lockheed Martins of the world and all the military complex, the big military complex. So what do they do with themselves? And then all of a sudden you get the likes of Elon Musk saying, and I'll take over space, right? Like, because they can do it more cheaply. They can do it better, the private companies. And so I think the government's kind of been at a loss. And it's very interesting that every single administration has wound up in some kind of major military conflict. And now we're looking from the side here. And while, we don't have actual boots on the ground yet, for goodness sakes, I think that it's quite telling that somehow we're back where we started, right? We're right back in a new Cold War. It is a Cold War, except now the Cold War has been escalated because of Ukraine, which is turning into a weird little proxy war, if you would. Maybe, let me give them the benefit of the doubt, they think they can tie up Russia's energy and therefore distract it away from China. The only problem is I think China's in on it too. And so now it's like China, Russia versus US and EU, and that's really not a good direction, right? Like we want to avoid global conflict at all cost. So there are things that could have been done and should have been done from an economic standpoint, right? You use trade and tariffs accordingly. I don't think this team is smart enough to. They still think inflation's coming down. I mean, and that biological men should be able to compete against biological women. Like, we get some basics, shall we say, that we need to cover. So instead of actually using trade and tariffs to articulate your viewpoint, suddenly we're sending weapons to Ukraine. And Ukraine sadly, is willing to sacrifice its young men and women in this effort. And it's horrible because these are lives. These are lives, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you. By the way, that Kennan quote was from 1998. So it was just as we were starting to see there the expansion of NATO. It's really pretty bad that we're in this situation. And I blame Blinken. And do I blame... Juan just joined as a member. Thank you, Juan. Good to have you here. If you're not a team member, join YouTube as a team member. One other thing I want to tell you, I'm actually going to put this in here right now before I forget. Let's see, 76research.com. This is the YouTube handle. This is the YouTube handle. Peace of Mind is over there. I see him on some of our live chats. It's like really small. We only have like 20 people watching. So the point is you get a lot of love and attention when we're live there. We do it like once a week or so. So Peace of Mind has been over there. It's good to see you again. And Peace of Mind is saying, Trish isn't woke. She's awake. Yeah. You know, I'm just a simple girl from Live Free or Die, New Hampshire. I'll leave you with that. We got Father's Day coming up. Don't forget the mugs, everyone. Good to have you here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you tomorrow.